Welcome to the fifth in the series of UI Builder introductions. This one, hopefully, very short introduction to the cascading style sheet design that is included by default in UI Builder. You don't have to use it, but I thought it was high time I gave a short introduction. If you would like some more information on this and a longer series, then please let me know in the comments so that I know to make something. I'm going to start very quickly. As you can see, usual layout. So we've got the page over here, which is produced by this flow here on the left. So nothing unusual there. And we've got the browser DevTools open at the bottom. And as always with your web browser, you can go and have a look at things like the CSS. That's just the overview, the kind of the import for it. You'll actually find the proper CSS down here. That's a minimized version. You can expand on that if you need to. But what I've wanted to show you first was the ability to make changes to your UI from Node-RED. So usual kind of setup here. This links back into here, and we have a single UIB update node here, and all this is doing is sending the payload to the attributes of the HTML part of the browser. So the HTML part is this bit here. It's the outer wrapper of your web page. So selecting that, and I'm going to send no content, but I'm going to change the attributes. So let's have a look. The attributes are set here. Payload. And all we're doing here is we're adding a CSS class statement to the HTML entry, which is either light or, unsurprisingly, dark. So let's try that. As you see, my browser is set by default to use a dark theme, and so the dark part of the UIB brand CSS is included automatically, but when I add the light class, it changes across to the light setting. If your browser is set to use a light theme, you'll get this automatically, but of course you can send dark to it. So here's a really easy way that you can flip between light and dark modes in UI Builder based web pages. So really easy. Now, the CSS file itself, if you want to have a look at it, which you probably will at some point, is available directly from within Node-RED, simply by using this kind of link. Obviously, the local host, the port, and any root nodes that you may have set will amend this slightly. As you can see here, I'm not running on port 1880, but on 1883. But there is the CSS file in all its glory. But we can also edit that, of course, in something like VS Code, which I've got here. So I'll quickly run through this to give you an idea of what's available. And generally speaking, each release of UI Builder builds on what's gone before and adds some new updates and improvements as we go along. But just to show you the structure, there's some instructional information at the top here, which gives you an idea on how to use CSS and how to use the file. And then we have a look here in this section called :root. And :root defines a whole bunch of CSS variables. If you're not familiar with modern CSS, then variables are a relatively new addition. but they let us define some variables that we can use later on in the rest of the CSS. And indeed, you can see it being used here. So here we're looking at the saturation level for that is set automatically when you're in dark mode, and that's a calculation based on the light variation saturation, and it's a calculation that uses that variable and multiplies it by a value. So that means that you can produce some quite complex values that you can reuse throughout your CSS. And it means that if you, for example, wanted to use the brand CSS, but you wanted to change the saturation level throughout, then you've just got one variable to change. You can put that in your own CSS file and it will overwrite the included brand one. Similarly, you can change things like the base hue for this, and you'll see how these are used in a little while. But it's a very quick way of being able to make rapid changes to your look and feel without having to go through and change loads and loads of things along the way. So here we can see the kind of main light and dark overrides. So very simple, not much to say about that. You probably are not going to need to do very much on that. But worth mentioning that in dark mode, shadows are very difficult. They're very difficult to get right. So I've done my best based on what the people who are far better at CSS than I am have suggested. But you may still need to go and tweak those. Please do let me know if you find any good tweaks that really improve things, because I would love to include those. I'm not a style sheet expert by any means. Oops, I've seen that. Okay, so getting into the main classes. So there's a whole bunch of kind of core classes that have been defined that you can reuse in your own code. So if you were, for example, to set some content to the CSS brand value class, you would get a particular background color and foreground color. And in fact, let's go and test that out, shall we? Because we should be able to do that from here. This is set by the payload, so we can, no, I'll tell you what to do. Let me add a new tag, and let me call it div. It's going to have some content source, and we're going to give it an ID, div1. And again, we're going to set the attributes, but this time we're going to do it manually. So we want to set the class attribute, and we want to set that to brand. Okay, let's do that. We need a quick inject, and we need to link that back to here. So there we go. Deploy that, click on that, and it didn't work because I forgot to put the closing bracket on there. Let's try that again. No, that still didn't work. Because I should have set that to a string. This is what happens when you don't prepare for your videos properly. There we go. So you can see there, here is the brand color in dark mode. And if we switch to light mode, you'll see that it's actually a slightly different shade. And the text has changed from white to black and black to white. and yet we've not done anything here to make any changes at all to the colors. We've just set a class, and that class automatically adopts accordingly. So let's in fact take that out of there and make that a message. Tribs, come in here, get rid of that, don't need that. Tribs, tribes. So let's see what we can do now to, in fact, I will add the payload back in, payload warning. Let's change that to be content source, message, payload. Okay, so I'll leave that as brand for the moment. We'll deploy that, and we've got, oops, missed. Oh dear, oh dear. What did I forget this time? Got to change that to that. Okay, so now we've got something called warning there. Let's go back and have a quick look at our CSS file here, because you can see we've got quite a lot of different classes here that we can use, and indeed we've got one that is called warning. So let's go and make that change. So instead of brand, we use class of warning. Like that, click, and you can see that that's now changed color. And of course, we've got a whole load of others that we can do. So let's, in fact, let's make this so that we can add more than one div. So div 2, this will be my error. Just change that quickly to be HTML ID. We're going to, oops, change that to message dot topic. My error. So there we have it. Now we've got two lines, and again, they will adapt according to the light and dark settings. So what else have we got that we can use? There's a lot of stuff here that you can use. There are also things like primary and secondary colors. So let's go and put a couple of those in. Primary. 3. Bang. You'll see that looks slightly different. Maybe not quite as nice. As I said, always looking for opportunities to improve the CSS. So please don't be shy about letting me know what you like, what you don't like, and what could be improved. That in, that, and we've got another one. So as you see, some of these work better in some contexts than they do in others, and there's a lot of different ones to play with. The ones marked surface are generally used to use as backgrounds. So you'll see that in various places where we use surfaces 1 to 5, and they have different levels of saturation and highlighting. There's one to use specifically for shadows, so that turns the shadow on. and then you've got information. There's another one here, complementary, and that's actually the color is 180 degrees opposite to the brand. So I'll leave that. You can try that for yourself. Similarly, I showed you the primary and secondary. By default, those are about 60 degrees. When I'm referring to the number of degrees, that's around a color wheel. So if you have a look on the internet for a color wheel, you'll see what I mean about those. And by default, I think it's up here somewhere. Is it? Can't remember where it's defined now. But the can't see it now. The I set a is it a 60, 120? No, 120 degree, which I think is called a triadic. It gives you your primary and secondary. So it's a color theory thing, and you can easily change that quite readily. In fact, there you go. Primary foreground and primary background. You'll find somewhere. If I could remember where, that would be useful, but I can't off the top of my head. You can look it up, obviously, in here. So if I just do it like that and search for it, then and there it is. So you'll see it's in one of these other regions, in fact, which I didn't go into earlier, which I should have done. So here's the variable, and you'll note that all the colors in the brand CSS are defined as HSL. Hue, saturation, and lightness is what HSL stands for, and it's deliberately done that way because it's much easier to calculate differences in hue, color, the saturation level, and the brightness level. So it's a much better way of working than the traditional computer RGB, where you've got three separate values: one for red, one for green, and one for blue. Much simpler to work with. But yeah, you can see that there is a hue and a complementary offset value, which is somewhere in here. No, that's the brand. Complementary. Yeah, well, I'm not going to worry about it too much, but you can look that up for yourself. Okay, so what you've got in the brand CSS is quite complex. But the idea is that complexity is hidden away, so that you really only need to adjust one or two very simple root variables in order to be able to get a look and feel that you're comfortable with. But if you need to go into much more detailed levels, then you can do so. So, for example, we saw the surfaces defined earlier as classes. Well, each of those surface classes has a variable behind it that defines the color of it in HSL format. So here you can see surface hue, and then a saturation level and a calculation for the lightness. And those lightness values change depending on whether you're in light or dark mode. And so each of those surfaces is defined in a slightly different way. But normally you don't have to worry about that because you can just choose a particular class, or indeed you can come and pick these variables up directly if you're creating your own classes. And similarly, we've got our various different success and information warning and so on. You'll notice as well that some of these kind of informational classes also have intense versions, and they also have some aliases. So warning and warn are the same thing, and then they have intense versions, and which have a lot more intensity, which you'll need in some cases where you just need that that greater intensity on screen. Similarly, failure, error, and danger are all defined as the same color, and then you've got intense versions. Same with info. So these are very often the only classes that you'll really need to play with in your own user interfaces. Obviously, these informational ones are really helpful if you need to display information of some particular level of importance. Beyond those, we have a what's called a basic reset. So this makes sure that all browsers are going to look very similar. They won't look identical necessarily, but they will be similar. And so we've set some good defaults here that make your web pages quite a lot more readable by default, apart from setting the colors, of course. So the line height is set to 1.5 pitch, and the font size it's set to 100%, which just means it takes it from the browser settings correctly. Some of the browsers have some quite odd settings in these and not necessarily the most readable. So that's why we override that. And the box sizing, again, this just makes it standard right across the browsers and right across all the different types of element that you might put on the screen. So these are best practice settings throughout. Don't get mad with them. You'll see some CSS resets listed if you're doing research on the internet that go much further than this. I don't see a need for that. The browsers generally these days have some fairly good, sensible settings. So these are just making them a little bit more consistent. And then we have some specific overrides for tables, again, making those consistent across different browsers and giving you the ability to set table headings sensibly, whether or not you're in light or dark mode. And even and odd rows are treated slightly differently, so they have a slightly different color and background to them. That just means that you've got a little bit more of an obvious differentiator between table rows. And of course, as always, you can override that if you don't want to. Some settings for forms. These work well with the UIB element. Form entry. But obviously they will override any form that you put on your page. Again, hopefully they are reasonably sensible and designed to give you a decent layout for a form overall. And it uses the modern setting of a flex display. Again, you can go and look that up yourself. So that's forms. And then we have some utility functions. So here there's a class called emoji, and that's quite useful if you want to get some, if you are into using emoji icons. Using this class will make those emojis generally much better on most platforms. The defaults in the browsers, not always the best. These make use of the what are generally better operating system level emojis. And some utilities for turning on and off borders, for making better boxes, and having heading levels within boxes. These two are quite interesting. You will actually see these in use in the default templates. And here we can see. So the default templates have a heading level 1, and we've used the with subtitle class. And all that does is actually reduce the margin at the bottom because we're going to put a subtitle in, which we've done there. And that automatically gets a role, which is for screen readers and things like that, which helps them understand that information is part of the title. And you can see again we've got a useful thing there, which just makes the font slightly smaller, puts it in italic, and sets the bottom margin so that it's consistent. We can force things to uppercase, we can center things, we can do an animation pulse, so that just pulses in and out on a regular basis. It can be useful if you really need to grab somebody's attention. Best not to overdo that, obviously, can annoy people quite a lot. And in fact, the animation is designed specifically to work with something called a status side panel, which you will see, I think, in one of my other examples somewhere, which is basically a box that lets you show statuses of something. Typically, I use it for the status of services and sensors on my home network. And you can set it to animate if it's, for instance, in an error state, which can be quite handy. And there's just a small panel at one side that just pulses in and out as a red color. Make your text larger and smaller, and you can make things a bit more compact. So if you've got something that has by default fairly large margins and padding on, you can just reduce that down. Again, can be quite handy. And similarly, the buttons. So I think I showed buttons on a previous video. They have a reasonable amount of space around them, but sometimes you don't want that. Sometimes you want a compact button, and therefore we've got a specific class. So if you set a button to class compact, then this one kicks in, and it will make it that just a little bit tighter. We have a bunch of others as well. I'm not going to go into great detail of those here. Some grid layouts, which can be very useful, and some notification settings as well, which will just kind of fix things in place, which can be useful when you're showing alerts and notifications. Okay, that's about all I'm going to go into for this video. I don't want to make it super long, and I suspect this is long enough already. I hope that was useful to you. It's a fairly simple introduction. There is, of course, CSS is a massive topic in its own right. My recommendation is keep it as simple as possible. You can always add things later, but it's hard to take things away. Okay, thanks for listening. And as I say, let me know in the comments if there's something you would like to see specifically. Let me know as well. Probably best in the Node-RED discourse. If you've got some issues with the CSS file in UIBuilder, and we'll see what we can do to help you. So again, thanks, and catch you in the next video. Goodbye for now.